Okay. So nice to see you all tonight. I'm very pleased you could make it. I know it's not the usual night that we learn, but nevertheless, I see that there are quite a few people on. It will be recorded for those who are not here tonight, and will be in the usual place on websites, KabbalahDecoded.com, and on our YouTube channel. So, long time I haven't given a class. My apologies for that. I was just very busy running backwards and forwards to New York and various other places, and it was just impossible to give classes not being at home. But I'm at home for now, so here we go. All right. This week's Torah reading is a section which is called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. And what does it talk about? It talks about the passing of Sarah, who was the wife of Abraham and essentially the mother of the Jewish people, just as he was sort of the father, so to speak, of the Jewish people. In other words, a progenitor, I suppose you could say. Together they were progenitors. So, the question that is asked is, if we're talking about the passing of Sarah and her burial and the whole story about how we acquired the cave of the Machpelah, the cave in which Adam and Eve were buried, he acquired it from Ephron in order to have it as a burial cave for his family. So it goes through the whole story. But one thing is clear, we are talking here about the passing away of Sarah. Why then does it speak about the life of Sarah? It should say the death of Sarah. But it's called, the parasha, the section is called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. One of the explanations is an explanation that is given in several places, including Kabbalah, is that tzaddikim, very saintly people, even in their death, they are called alive. Whereas people who are the opposite of saintly, even in their lives, even in their life in this world, they are called dead. In other words, a person who lived a proper and holy and spiritual and upright, righteous life in this world, continues in a sense to live. His legacy or her legacy lives onwards, no matter the fact that the body actually passes away. And this is this is true for all of us. If we live a righteous life in this world, then we don't really pass away fully. It says about Jacob, Yaakov Avinu. When Jacob passed away, it's the sages say about Jacob, about Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Our forefather Jacob didn't die. And then they explain what they mean. They said, it was since his offspring is alive, he is also alive. He is alive through his offspring. He is alive through his children. And therefore, Sarah was very much alive. So that's one explanation about why we talk about the life of Sarah, because since she was an extremely holy and righteous person, therefore her life continues to this very day. Her offspring is alive, she's alive. Her legacy is alive, she's alive. That's one explanation. The second explanation is that this has to do with the idea of the eternality of the soul. That the soul remains eternal, and therefore the soul of Sarah, continues on and it never dies. It's only the body that dies, but not the soul. They go even further in Kabbalah and they say not only is it true that the soul does not die, but to a certain extent the body itself does not die. How so? In other words, in a certain sense, the body does not die. How so? We see the body getting put in the grave, and the body disintegrates, and the flesh disintegrates. All that's left is the bones, and so on, the skeletons. How do you say the body doesn't die? Eventually, even the skeleton probably disintegrates, I would imagine, unless preserved somehow or another. So how does this work? What does it mean the body doesn't die? So it's explained that there is a certain part of a person which is called in Hebrew, it's called etzem haluz, or the luz bone, L-U-Z, the luz bone, which is indestructible and continues to survive the death of the body. In other words, it never disappears. It never disappears, even to the extent that if a person is cremated or is put in, as many people were in Auschwitz, put in those ovens and so on, nevertheless, the etzem haluz survives that. It does not burn and die. Now, how could that be? What if the body is crushed up into powder, basically? There's an old Jewish joke about a woman that dies and she asks to be cremated, and so it's not a thing that we do. We don't, in Jewish tradition, we do not do cremation, right? We do not do cremation at all, and but nevertheless, this lady asks a joke, right? The lady asks to be cremated and for her ashes to be spread all over Macy's. Macy's is the shopping, the department store. So the lawyer who was writing a will asked her, well, why do you want to do that? So she said, because that way my daughter will visit me every day. But you see, why is it? So someone asked a question. Yeah, Frank asked a question. If the body is cremated, then why is it wrong if the soul goes on? Because the body also needs to be buried in the right way, because that's how it gets its purification. It gets its purification from being laid in the ground and decomposing in that way. And if it doesn't go through that process, then it doesn't get to be purified in the right way. Okay, so cremation is not an option, but nevertheless, even if a person was cremated against his will, like for instance, I was in Auschwitz and so on and so forth, right? Situations like that. Nevertheless, there's a part of the body, the etzem haluz, survives. So let's explain first of all how that happens, right? How does that happen that the etzem haluz survives? The answer is like this. There's a Kabbalistic teaching from a certain book called the Elia Rabbah. So he explains over there that the etzem haluz, this luz bone, this bone which is supposedly part of the body, some part of the body, which part of the body we don't know. Some people identify it as the back of the skull, that sort of round bone at the back of the skull. For men who wear tefillin, that's where you put the dalet of the tefillin over that bone. But that's only speculation that that's the bone. The truth is that that's not the bone. So where is this bone in the body? So the explanation is this. The Elia Rabbah, Kabbalistic work, explains that this luz bone derives its nourishment only from food that is eaten after the Sabbath. In other words, food that is eaten on Saturday night after the stars come out, on Motzei Shabbos. It only derives any benefit from Motzei Shabbos, from after Shabbos. The food after Shabbos. It's a special seudah, a special meal that is made then. There are really three main meals on the Sabbath that a person is obligated to, if at all possible, to celebrate, to observe. That's the first meal on Friday night. The second meal on the Sabbath morning meaning late morning, early afternoon, and then the third meal is called Seudah Shlishit, the third meal, that is towards sunset, but before sunset. And then this is later on in the evening after the Sabbath is already, it's no longer Sabbath, it's still it's Saturday night now. Then there is a meal which is called the Malava Malka, the accompanying of the queen. We accompany the queen. The Sabbath is regarded as the queen. And we accompany it out. In other words, we make a meal to accompany it on its way, so to speak, until next week, right? That's called the Sudas Malava Malka, the feast of the accompanying the queen, right? Accompanying the queen. Sabbath is regarded as the queen. Okay, so during that meal, that is the only food from which this etzem haluz, which this luz bone, derives any nourishment. Why that is, I don't know. He doesn't explain why that is, but that's the way he says. That's the way he says it. That's the way it is. It has to do with King David. It has to do with various other things. Okay, so now Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden also had this loose bone. When did they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? On Friday, on the eve of the Sabbath, on Friday. They didn't wait till, had they waited till the Sabbath and eaten that fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil on the Sabbath, nothing would have happened. It would not have been a sin. They ate it at the wrong time, before the time that they should have eaten it. And therefore, it was regarded as a sin. But nevertheless, that sin that they committed on the eve of Sabbath affected the entire body. It affected everything. It affected and infected everything except the loose bone. What happened with the loose bone? The loose bone doesn't derive benefit from the food on Friday or on Thursday or on Wednesday or on any other day or even on the Sabbath. It derives the benefit only from the food of after the Sabbath, the meal of Malava Malka. That's the only benefit that the only nourishment it gets is from that food. So therefore, it wasn't affected at all by the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's what the Eliyahu Rabbah says. That's how he explains it. It's actually based on a Zohar that describes this in slightly different ways. In any event, what happens as a result of the sin of the tree of good and evil, of the knowledge, the tree of knowledge of good and evil? What happened as a result was that the body incurred death. Death was not supposed to happen. The body was supposed to be able to live forever. It was supposed to live forever. Just as the soul lives forever, so too was the body intended to live forever. The body was intended to continue forever. But because of the sin of the tree of good and evil, it incurred death. But the Etzem Aluz, the loose bone, did not incur death. It didn't incur death because it didn't benefit from that food. And therefore, it is what remains of a person and will remain always intact until it is reconstructed at the time of Tchias HaMesim, at the time of the resurrection of the dead, when all the dead will be resurrected through their loose bone, through the loose bone. So when they asked why would it be okay for Adam and Eve to eat of the forbidden fruit on the Sabbath, because then it wouldn't have been forbidden. There's certain things that you have to wait for, right? You shouldn't eat them earlier because it's simply not the right time, right? If they would have waited until the Sabbath, they could have elevated that food. Because they ate it before the Sabbath, because of the holiness of the Sabbath, the holiness of the Sabbath could have helped them to elevate that food from the knowledge of good and evil into the tree of life. It would have become the tree of life. However, because they ate it before the time that it was due, it became the tree of death. Right? From that sin, from that transgression, they incurred death. But what incurred death? Only the body. But not the loose bone and not the soul. The soul did not incur death, and also the loose bone did not incur death. Okay. So, therefore, the resurrection happens from this bone, which is called the Etzem Aluz, the loose bone. Now it goes a little bit further than that. There's a question here that I don't really want to answer right now. Maybe I could answer privately on another occasion. If you write to me, I'll answer that question about the spiral of time. Okay, so it goes a little bit further than that. There are actually, for what it is that we do in this world, we are brought into this world for a purpose. And the purpose of our living in this world is to make this world into a holy place, to make it what is called in the vernacular a dir b'tachtonim, in other words, a dwelling place for divinity in this world. We have to make this world into a temple, into a holy place, into the Beis HaMikdash. And then God dwells within us and amongst us. In other words, godliness is manifested in the world. And that is the purpose of our creation. That is why we are here. Now, what is the reward for this? What is the reward for doing the works that we're supposed to do? So there's two rewards. One reward is called the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, and the other reward is called Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of the dead, the time of the resurrection of the dead. Now, there's a big discussion that goes on between two great sages, what the ultimate reward is. Is the ultimate reward the Garden of Eden, or is the ultimate reward the resurrection of the dead, Tchias HaMetim? It's an argument between the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Ramban, Nachmanides. The Rambam, Maimonides, argues that the greatest reward is a disembodied soul. In other words, that the soul gets its reward in the delight of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is not a geographical place per se; it is a spiritual place, right? It's a place essentially of spirit. It's a spiritual delight, the delight that one receives from eliciting light in this world through Torah study and through prayer. The Ramban, Nachmanides, argues, and he says, no, the greatest reward is not the Garden of Eden, which the soul goes to after its death from the body, after it leaves the body. The soul eventually, after it goes through a purification stage, which could be shorter or longer depending on who the person was, or in some cases could be a direct transition from this world to the Garden of Eden. I'll just tell a little story that's told in the Zohar about Rebbe Abba. Rebbe Abba was the one who wrote down much of the teachings of the Idra Rabbah, right? The Idra Zuta. He wrote down the teachings of the Idra Zuta because he was the student that Rabbi Shimon told. He selected him to write this down because he said that he would be able to conceal the matters sufficiently well that only those who have the proper training will be able to delve into the depths of what he will reveal on the last day of his life in this world in the Idra Zuta. Right? The last day, the day which we celebrate Lag BaOmer, that was the day he passed away. So that was the day where he revealed the teachings of the Idra Zuta, which is the deepest teachings of the Kabbalah, the deepest teachings of the Zohar. Anyway, the story is told about Rebbe Abba that when it was time for him to pass away, so because he was such a great saint, such a saintly person, he was given he was accorded the possibility, he was given the honor of being shown his place in the Garden of Eden before he passed away. They told him, you're going to go to the Garden of Eden immediately after you die, and there's a short cleansing process, and then you'll go to the Garden of Eden. And he said, wait a second, I'm not so sure that I want to go there. First, you have to show me where I'm going to be. Where is my place going to be? So, I mean, this is told sort of graphically. Don't take it literally. It's not meant literally. But they took him up on the wall, the barrier, the Great Wall, dividing Mexico, not dividing Mexico and America, dividing the world and Gan Eden and the Garden of Eden. In other words, it's a spiritual barrier. They took him, put him on top of that barrier. They showed him his place in the Garden of Eden from the top of that wall, the top of that barrier. And as he was being shown the place, he just jumped into the Garden of Eden. He jumped right in. So the angels that were showing him his place, hey, you can't do that. This is, you have to go through the whole process. You have to die first and so on and so forth before you go to the Garden of Eden. You can't go straight in life into the Garden of Eden. You have to go through death, and you have to go through purification. You have to get a process of being made ready to go in. You can't just get it. No, so I'm here. I'm not leaving. So they took his case to the heavenly court, and in the heavenly court they said, he wasn't really allowed to do that, but now that he's there, leave him there, leave him be. So that's the story of Rabbi Abba. So very few people go to Gan Eden that way. There are a couple of other cases where a similar kind of thing happened with Hanoch, and there are some others, Eliyahu, Elijah, but without going into it in any great detail, this is something that's not the normal course of things. In any event, Maimonides argues that the highest place, the highest reward is the reward of Gan Eden, the spiritual delight of the soul in all the light it elicited in this world through Torah study and through prayer and meditation and so on. The Ramban argues, Nachmanides argues, and he says, no, the greatest reward is Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, the revival of the resurrection of the dead. And that reward is the greatest reward for having fulfilled the commandments in this world. Now, what's the difference between Torah study and prayer and meditation and fulfilling commandments on the other hand? One hand, Torah, and the other, fulfilling the commandments. Study, understanding, depth, meditation, on the other hand, action. So it's explained in Hasidic texts in particular, but in Kabbalistic texts as well, that they represent two different sfirot, two different aspects, two different sfirot. Torah study is Chokhmah. It's called Chokhmat Hashem, the wisdom of God that you're studying. And that wisdom illuminates the person's soul. Right? That Chokhmas Adam Tayir Panav. The person's wisdom is what illuminates his face, or alternatively, illuminates his inner essence. Right? The wisdom of God, when you study it and you acquire it, illuminates a person's essence. Whereas the mitzvot are called the Ratzon, the will of God. Now, will corresponds in Kabbalah to Keter. So that's Chokhmah and that's Keter. Chokhmah there are many different levels of Chokhmah. Therefore, there are many different levels of the Garden of Eden. But wisdom, Ratzon, Keter, but Keter, the will of God, Keter, affects everything equally. In other words, when a person has a will to do something, there's no locus of where your will is. Chokhmah is associated, corresponds to the brain. Chokhmah is a power of the soul, but it's manifested in the brain. Primarily the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is Bina. The back of the brain is Dat. But will is everywhere. Will controls the functioning of your limbs as well. It can control even in people who've trained themselves, it can control their digestive processes. It even can control, although it's usually involuntary, but it can control their heartbeat and their pulse beat. I remember there was a time when I used to enjoy as a kid, or as a youngster, let's say not a kid, making nurses crazy by changing my pulse beat by thinking different thoughts. And it actually works. If you think of running or whatever it is, your pulse beat will speed up. And if you think of calm, etc., your pulse beat will slow down. You can actually control it with your mind. So I used to do this when I would go visit the doctor and make them a little nuts. But in any event, it can be done. Yeah, the mind controls the body and can control even the involuntary processes. As we see with many of the great sages and saints, that they were able to fast, for example, from week to week. They would eat once, they would eat on the Sabbath, that's all, one day a week they would eat, right? Yeah, you taught your kids to do this, keep the doctor's food thinking you're healthy, good. Okay, so once a week, the Baal Shem Tov, for example, used to eat once a week for an extended period of time. The Arizal also once a week, he would only eat on Shabbos. And when we say only eat, it means eat and drink. He would fast the entire week, although the Baal Shem Tov never called it fasting, he just called it not eating. He didn't eat, he didn't fast, but he didn't eat the entire week, or drink. They were able to do this because they had control, they had gotten to a stage of control of even their involuntary processes that it wouldn't disturb them. Now, I don't suggest anyone tries this, because in our days, the body is not what it used to be. It's much weaker than it used to be for various reasons. And harming the body by fasting and doing all kinds of other things like this is not wise, And not only that, but it is in fact a transgression. It's a sin, really. To harm your body is a sin. For those people, for that reason, for the Baal Shem Tov, it wasn't a sin. It wasn't difficult for them to do it, right? It didn't harm them. Us, it will harm. And as Maimonides points out, a healthy body is part of God's ways. To keep your body healthy, you're given a vessel, you have to keep it healthy. You have to make sure that it is in good condition and that it is as healthy as it could possibly be. If you need to go to the doctor, you have to go to the doctor. You have to eat properly, get sunshine, exercise, and so on and so forth. All of us, I'm sure, are deficient in the exercise department, but nevertheless, you're supposed to. At least we know what we're supposed to do. So, to get back to this, so the Ramban argues, Nachmanides argues, that the reward, the greatest reward, is the reward that is done for the mitzvot because it elicits keter. In keter, everybody is equal. There's no higher and lower. The will envelops a person's chokhmah, his wisdom, as well as his power of action. Okay. And therefore, because it is keter, it's a much higher light than the light of chokhmah, and that is what is manifested in, that's what is, what comes to fruition, so to speak, at the time of Tchiyas HaMeisim. And therefore, Tchiyas HaMeisim needs your body. That's why your body has to be resurrected, because it was the body that produced the reward of Tchiyat HaMeitim, of resurrection of the dead, and therefore the body gets its reward. However, and the reward, actually, the resurrection of the body comes about through the various, through all the mitzvot, all the commandments that a person has fulfilled. Whether those commandments are the commandments of the 613 mitzvot, which are given to Jews only, or whether it's talking about the 7 Noahide laws, which is given to all of mankind. If a person fulfills the 7 Noahide laws the way he's supposed to, or she is supposed to, then the person is worthy of reward for doing that as well. Okay, so now to get back to the question of where this bone is located. Where is this bone in the body? So the the bone is not visible. Why not? Because after the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, everything fell down much, much further than it was. It was a much, much higher spiritual level, to the extent that they say about Adam and Eve, but that Adam's heel, which is the lowest part of the body, the most insensitive part of the body essentially, that Adam's heel was so bright that it made the sun look dim. In other words, it was so filled with light that even the sun looked dim next to him. It was filled with light. And even the lowest part of him was filled with, even his heel. But because of the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all of existence, all of creation fell down hundreds of levels, and therefore became physical, much more physicalized. Instead of being filled with light, it is now filled with skin. Let me explain what I mean. The word for light in Hebrew is or with an aleph. I will write it in the chat over here, even though most of you probably don't read Hebrew, but I'll write it in the chat anyway. So, or, that's what it looks like, or, right? And the word for skin is or, right, with an ayin. It's almost the same letters, same 2 letters over here. These are the first letters, and Hebrews are written from right to left. So aleph is the first letter right here, and ayin is the first letter there, but they share the other 2 letters are the same, the vav and the resh, right? Vav and resh are the same. So the only difference between the ayin and the aleph, which sound almost the same, although that's only in our pronunciation, but originally it was pronounced more as a guttural word. You can't see it because you don't have the chat open. Maybe open the chat. You don't see it in the chat here. You don't see that? Oh, because it's in private. Okay, sorry about that. Group chat. Let me see here. How did I get to private? I don't know. 1 second. Just a second. to everyone. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, so or with an aleph and or with an ayin. Okay, there you go. The aleph and the ayin are different, right? The aleph and the ayin are different, but the vav and the resh in each letter, in each word is the same. So it says originally that after the sin, so God dressed them in ketones, or in tunics of skin. In tunics of skin. It was only after the sin that they wore skin. In fact, the Medrash explains that in the teachings of Rabbi Meir, who was a very, very great sage, he said in his Torah it was written the word or with an aleph, that God dressed them in the Torah of light, in clothing of light. Why did he dress them in clothing of light? Because that Rabbi Meir's teachings were on such a high level that they transcended the sin. They were teachings of the Torah from before the sin of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So therefore it was called ketonet, or with an aleph, tunic of light. But after the sin, it was a tunic of skin. Right, so what we experience essentially is a tunic of skin. We experience the Torah with a physical body, and it's physicalized. In the future, in the time of the resurrection of the dead, it will return to its state of light, but nevertheless it'll be a physical body. It'll be light physicalized. How that works, I don't know, right? But that's what it will be. It'll be full of light, but nevertheless it'll be living in this world. And that's what the loose bone represents. Essentially, the loose bone is a bone that existed. It's a part of the body that existed from before the sin and continued after the sin, and therefore you won't be able to see it, because we can only see things hundreds of levels lower than they were originally. But the loose bone remained at its original in its original state, at its original level. And therefore we can't see it, because we can't see things that are on such an elevated spiritual level. At least most of us can't see that. There may be some, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Arizal, they could see it, but we don't. Okay? So, those that say that it's somewhere in the neck bone, that is not in fact the case, or at the base of the skull, that is not in fact the case. It is something that we can't see, and therefore it can't be destroyed, because it doesn't exist in this world. It exists on a plane of existence far beyond this world. This world is the end result of the falling of holiness from its place where it was into klippa, into impurity, and that's essentially what this world is. It's mostly impurity, very little holiness, mostly impurity. Okay, so the resurrection therefore will be from the loose bone in the future, and this is why when it talks about Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, Sarah, when she passed away, didn't pass away even physically. She didn't pass away even physically. Yes, it's true that her body was died and her body was buried, and was buried in the Maras HaMachpelah, in the cave where Adam and Eve were buried, and eventually Abraham was buried in Hebron, right? That's where she is interred. And Rivka and Yitzhak are there, and Yaakov and Leah are there as well. So it's Adam and Eve, and Abraham and Sarah, and Isaac and Rebekah, Yitzhak and Rivka, and Jacob and Leah. Rachel, Rachel, Yaakov's other wife, his most beloved wife, is buried not there but in Bet El, right? In Bet El, on the way out of the country, for various reasons which we don't need to go into now. Maybe we'll discuss it another time. But I just said that Sarah didn't die physically. What does it mean she didn't die physically? Because as soon as Isaac, as Yitzhak married Rivka, and he brought her into his tent, so it says, and it says that when he brought her into his tent, the sages explain, and Rivka was Sarah. Rivka, Rebecca, was Sarah. So the way it's usually explained is that she was in the same level of holiness and goodness and uprightness as Sarah. But explained in Kabbalah that she was really, in a sense, a reincarnation of Sarah. She had the soul of Sarah within her. So, in any event, the whole concept of Chaye Sarah, of the life of Sarah, brings us to think about the concept of eternal life. In other words, the eternal life that happens with the body after Tchias HaMesim, after the resurrection of the dead. When there will be no more death, death will be removed. And all of us will be able to say about ourselves that it will be Chaya Moshe and Chaya Rivka and Chaya Sarah and Chaya everybody else, whoever it may happen to be, right? It will be the life that will be lived essentially forever. Let me see some of the questions over here that I didn't get to earlier. We all have the power within us to defeat death, yes. If we're created with a loose bone that is not subject to death, we all essentially have the power within us to defeat death, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, yes. Yes, we do, absolutely. That doesn't mean that the body is not going to die and be buried, but it does mean that a person can live on after that. Yes? So the mystery of the resurrection, it is hidden in the teachings of Kabbalah or Torah or both. Essentially, it's hidden in the teachings of Kabbalah and in the oral Torah as well. It's not only in Kabbalah, but it's in the oral Torah as well, not in the written Torah. It doesn't mention it explicitly in the written Torah, and they only deduce it or they derive it from where it says, "Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael." Then Moses and the Jewish people sang. But it doesn't say, when it says they sang by the sea after Pharaoh and all his chariots, etc., and his soldiers were drowned in the sea, in the Reed Sea. So then it says, Az Yashir, that the Jewish people sang a song, but it doesn't say sang in the past. It actually says sang in the future. They will sing. So Moses and the Jewish people will sing means that in the future they're going to be resurrected and will sing that song again. Right? Okay. So it is hinted to in the Torah, but it's not stated explicitly. However, it is stated explicitly in the oral Torah, and in fact is one of the 13 principles of faith which Maimonides, the Rambam, enumerates. It's the last one. I believe in perfect faith in the resurrection of the dead. And it is explained at length in Kabbalah and particularly in Hasidic teachings. Isn't Olam Haba the final reward, not this side? Now, when you say Olam Haba, there are two explanations. There are two different ways of explaining Olam Haba, the world to come. The world to come could be the world of the Garden of Eden, in other words, that spiritual delight, or it could be the world of the future, the world of resurrection, which hasn't happened yet. Gan Eden and the Garden of Eden exists now. But the world of the future, the world of resurrection of the dead, that didn't happen yet. That's why essentially most authorities call Olam Haba, the world to come, as the world which never came yet. It didn't exist yet. In other words, the world of Tchiat HaMeitim, the world of the resurrection, is Olam Haba, the world to come, and that is the final reward, and that's what we're talking about here. So that is the final reward, yes. Okay, let's see what else. If we keep reincarnating, what is going to the Garden of Eden? What keeps reincarnating? No, reincarnating generally only happens when a person has to have either a rectification or for the sake of teaching the world something. There's only two reasons for reincarnation. One is to rectify something that wasn't done before, and then there are only really three in general. There are only three possible chances for reincarnation. In other words, it can only happen 3 times. It's not something that goes on forever and ever like in Buddhism, right? It happens 3 times, and if that doesn't work, then there's another purification process, another rectification process, which is not reincarnation, but a different one. And a soul can be reincarnated into a body or into another person's soul in order to lead them to a higher level or in order to teach the world an important teaching that needs to be taught. So the Arizal said about himself that he will be reincarnated a generation later, right? There are those that say that the reincarnation, the Arizal, was someone whose name was the Rashash, for short, Rashash, Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, who was one of the great Kabbalists of his time, and he expounded greatly on the teachings of the Arizal. Okay, so the city of Luz that Isaac took by force was named. Does that have anything to do with the Luz bone, in your opinion? That's a very good question. As far as I know, they're not really related geographically. In other words, there's no relationship. But it is spoken about in the Kabbalah and the Zohar that this does hint to the Etzem Haluz, to the Luz bone. And there is a connection. I forget exactly what the Zohar says about it. I can't remember right now. But there is a connection by way of sort of a rem, as a hint. It's not really anything ultimately explicit, although I cannot remember the exact content of what it says now. Okay, any other questions? Okay, folks, see you hopefully on Sunday. If I can, Sunday evening it'll be, not Sunday morning anymore, because I teach at that time. But Sunday evening, and then again Wednesday, hopefully. I will let you know. All right.